A diagnosis can be helpful in understanding your child's needs and getting them the right support. But what do you do if they flat out refuse to cooperate with the assessments? It can be easy to slip into thinking a diagnosis is your saviour and your child's avoidance is a block that must be removed. But this will likely lead to more fights, and it isn't actually necessary. There are other ways. I have a letter here from a mum who suspects her 10-year-old son is autistic, but says he doesn't want to be assessed. She writes, "Dear Esther, I think my 10-year-old may be autistic. He is very bright, but he struggles socially in school, often getting into fights with friends. They seem to know just which buttons to press. He gets upset when rules are broken or routines change, and he is sensitive to loud noises such as the school fire alarm. He's been defiant since he was small and can be controlling, particularly with his sister, who he fights with all the time. He spends hours in his room on his PlayStation. I don't even want to talk about bedtimes. I want to seek a diagnosis, but he says he doesn't. There is a child in his class who is autistic, who he doesn't like. I think he doesn't want to be labelled the same as them. I'm exhausted from fighting and desperate for sleep. How can I convince him we should get a diagnosis?" Oh man, I really feel for you. It's really tough dealing with a demand avoidant child, and when you throw in the lack of sleep, oh my goodness. But I have some ideas that might help. So you're right that a diagnosis might help you understand where this behaviour is coming from, but it won't stop it. And I'm sorry to say, the vast majority of parents feel that post-diagnosis they were offered little support. In your case, where your child is resisting, I think I might let it go, at least for now. You don't have to give up on it completely. In a few years, he'll be at a secondary school and possibly away from this person he doesn't like. He'll be meeting lots of new people, some of whom will be neurodivergent, and he might like them. He might start to recognise himself in them, including the strengths and not just the so-called problems. Where you can, give him opportunities to meet other young autistic people, although with his demand avoidance, you may need to do that subtly. And you might want to point out when autistic people are in the news doing interesting things, for example, Greta Thunberg speaking at the UN. His attitude isn't going to change overnight, and you need to be careful because if you push too hard, you risk making the situation worse. But if you can drip, 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 over time he may develop better associations with the condition and be more open to being assessed. But what to do in the meantime, I hear you ask? Well, there is plenty actually. I would start by speaking to the school. Tread carefully around declaring your son autistic, as some professionals get touchy about parental diagnosis. Instead, explain what you have noticed about your child's struggles. Be specific and give examples. So you might say he seems sensitive to loud noises. He covers his ears when he gets upset, walking down busy roads, and he complains about the fire alarm at school. Depending on your relationship with the SENCO, that's the Special Educational Needs Coordinator, and the general mood of the meeting, you might want to throw in a casual, "I'm obviously not qualified to say if he's autistic, but he seems to have some of the characteristics." You can ask the school for support. For example, to tackle those fights with other children, he might benefit from some social skills group work or some help from the school counsellor to manage his emotions. If these fights are happening at a certain time, for example, playtimes are often quite a challenging time for neurodivergent kids, then ask for a quiet space he can go to when he feels himself getting wound up. Stress to the school that you want to prevent the behaviour before it happens, so the teachers aren't dealing with a child who has exploded because he can't cope in a social situation. You mentioned about other children pressing his buttons. Depending on whether you feel this is deliberate to provoke a reaction in him, then you might want to flag it to the school as bullying. If not intentional and it's just a clash between two children, then still flag it to them. They can then monitor the situation. If the school is resistant to making changes or say they don't have the resources, you can apply for an EHCP, that's an Education, Health and Care Plan. This provides funding to schools to provide the necessary provision for your child. They are legally binding and they're reviewed every year to adapt to your child's growing needs. You don't need a diagnosis to apply for one, and it is based on needs. Schools will often say your child won't qualify, but this is either because they don't understand the law or they're trying to get out of the paperwork. There is a lot of paperwork. The threshold for assessment is actually quite low. And I have a quiz to help parents work out if their child's eligible. It's on my website and I'll pop a link to that in the description. Now for home. If your child is dealing with all this stress at school, then the best thing for when they come home is to create a safe space for them to decompress. If that means stuck in front of a screen, so be it. Restrictions on screen time are usually counterproductive as they only make them want it more. As the psychologist Naomi Fisher says in her book, A Different Way to Learn, ask a marketing person how to get people to want something more. You make it limited. I've certainly seen that in my home. My daughter collects those little mini brand toys and she's desperate for the rares and the ultra rares. She got one the other day and she was completely over the moon. So if you want to make your child want something, then restrict their access. Also, I think it's worth remembering that the world is tough for neurodivergent people. Sometimes they need another world to escape into. Who are we to say they can't have that? Especially after we have asked them to slog through a day at school, an environment that was not built for their needs. So leave him be with his PlayStation. And in fact, you may want to implement a low demand parenting approach more generally. Look up NVR parenting and read about baskets theory. This is a way of dividing demands into 3 categories. So the first category is the red basket, and this is the dangerous, illegal or harmful behaviours. These are the ones that you focus on changing because you have to, but you shouldn't have more than 1 or 2 in the red basket at any one time. Next, we have the amber basket. These are the ones that might wind you up or maybe consider them rude, but until you have dealt with the red basket behaviours, you let these go. Again, no more than 1 or 2 in the amber basket. Everything else goes in green, and you do like Elsa and you let it go. Implementing baskets radically changed things in our home. The fights and meltdowns reduced significantly, and our attachment and respect for each other grew at the same time. Now, you mentioned sleep, and this is such a big one and affects so many families with neurodivergent kids. For us, things got better when I ditched the parenting books that said you need firm boundaries and never allow a kid in your bed. I met my daughter where she was at in that moment, and if she needed to be close, if she needed a dummy, if she needed to hold my hand, I just went with it. I also found some sensory activities before bed really helped. Nothing too stimulating, but maybe being wrapped tightly in a blanket, massages with hand cream, and sucking warm water through a straw or a sports lid. We also have this back scratcher that I run all over her body and she absolutely loves that. It goes in fits and starts with us, but we generally have more good nights than bad now. But I know for others it is much tougher. And of course, lack of sleep can make those daytime behaviours even worse, even mimicking the symptoms of ADHD. I could probably do a whole separate video on sleep, and maybe I will at some point. What I would say for now is that if you feel you have tried everything and he's still not sleeping, then get professional help. There is a great organisation called the Sleep Charity, and they have a special consultant with experience with SEND. I believe she actually has a child with SEND herself, so she knows what she's talking about. You may also want to consider speaking to your GP about melatonin, which is a drug that aids sleep. Keep a sleep diary so you have evidence of what you have tried and show how bad the situation is. Some GPs are reluctant to provide prescriptions, so going in armed with your evidence will strengthen your case. Finally, I really want to urge you to look after you. As they say on the plane, put your mask on before your child's. I call this the first pillar of SEN parenting. There are 3 in total. And I have some quick and simple ideas on my website that even the most sleep-deprived mama can put in place. This includes some guided tapping meditations, tapping is a combination of Eastern traditions of acupuncture and Western psychotherapy. It's a radical way of releasing stress and anxiety and can be done at home within as little as 10 minutes. I do it with my daughter, who's benefited massively from it, and I do it on myself too because it's amazing. I have some information, including some free resources that you can sign up for on my website. I've popped a link in the description below. Thank you for taking time to watch my video. I hope you have found some of the tips useful for your family. Do check out my 3 pillars of SEN parenting. I've put links for those in the description. And if you have a problem you want help with, you will also find a link below where you can contact me for free advice.